So Yohan Caunegre, this is great to have you on the Burning Castle podcast. I'll give people just a little bit of background so they know where you're coming from and where you are, which is in the great and beautiful and charming, enchanting city of Bordeaux, in the south of France, which is a city that's really near and dear to my heart because I lived there, because I visit there, and I have friends there, and I just it's a very special place. And you, as you'll tell us a little bit more about this, but you own or you run a cafe that's really well known called L Alchimiste. It's not what you think when you think, I think of, the traditional French cafe of the Parisian sidewalks. This is really a different kind of experience, and it's really about the coffee, and it's really about the experience of the coffee, which is quite a different notion, I think, even in France. But I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let you take over and give us just a little bit about you and yourself and what you're doing, and then we'll take it from there.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. So yeah, L'Alchimiste is L'Alchimiste. Then with the French accent, L'Alchimiste is a specialty cafe. Well, it started as a specialty roastery about almost 8 years ago now. It wasn't funded by me. It was funded by my associate Arthur. That was so basically he came back from, to give a little bit of background of where the company started. He started L'Alchimiste 8 years ago from scratch, realizing that we didn't drink any good coffee in France back then, especially in France and in Italy, because the culture, the strong culture of drinking coffee in those two countries are so strong and so deeply rooted that it's tough for French people and especially Italian people to move on from this kind of tradition of drinking the small, bitter, dark, badly roasted and badly, sourced coffee at the bar. So, some countries like Australia, America, England, they didn't have that much of a culture back then, and so they moved straight ahead from us to the specialty coffee. And so after from that, he realized that we didn't drink any good coffee in France and started to realizing that we need to do something about it, especially in Bordeaux. There wasn't any great cafe. So it started L'Alchimiste, which was only a small corner of a production site as a roastery. And it's been 8 years. So now it was him. And then I started along a year after that. I came along, and then we became partners in the company, and now there's a small team of 12, and we have a roastery, a production site, and 2 cafes in the city.
Yeah, so I think it's like you hear someone telling this story about coffee in France, and it sounds like you're telling a story from the 80s or the 70s, but it's really not, right? This is quite a new thing.
Yeah, people are they're so used to drinking black coffee, and it's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a thing, but people have traveled a lot, especially the newer generations, and they realize that not only coffee but wine and food in general could be something else. Especially, I'll talk a lot about wine because I'm originally from a wine background, and especially in Bordeaux, as you can tell, there's a bit of a wine culture here. But I grew up in the vineyards in Saint-Emilion, which is one of the most famous village of red wine making village in the world, probably. But I have to still drink a lot of wine, but I don't drink most of Bordeaux because we have this strong old culture of wine there. That Bordeaux and the wine is kind of what Italy and France are for coffee, in a way. We're so deeply rooted in that old-fashioned ways of doing things that people have trouble moving ahead and starting new things, and kind of do things differently, I guess, as we do for coffee now.
That is, well, so growing up in Saint-Emilion, that's kind of crazy. I mean, that is, it's like saying, as growing up as like I forget the name of the town in Italy where they produce Ferraris, but like a car lover growing up there, or, that this is the real heart of wine making, traditionally and probably still today. So that must have been quite something. So you grew up with this. You grew up with wine. I mean, you can't avoid it.
With backyard was vineyards.
And you were living as like as a boy, as a kid, in the vineyards, essentially,
Yeah,
around and among the vineyards.
it's cycling through the vines, so this little narrow, very heighted, narrow wine grapes. It was, yeah, that's, I grew up there.
And were you guys drinking from an earlier age? Were you know, I know a lot of cultures where there's significant.
No, that's really, I've been around wine since I was born, but well, my parents and grandparents did let's drink wine.
Mhm.
Even though at like 8 or 10 we started to asking about it, what did it taste like, but usually you don't like it at this age. So
Right.
especially these kind of terroirs that are quite strong and rich, even though in Bordeaux, Saint-Emilion is kind of at the lightest end of wines, in red wines, but still it's
Mm.
quite heavy, rich tannins wine. So when you're young, usually don't like that.
So you grew up in Saint Emilion. You grew up as someone who's connected to wine, and it sounded like you ended up working in wine as well. Like, what were you doing? How did you get into it?
Well, I didn't get any degrees in wine and stuff, but I've been around wine for as long as I can remember, drinking it, been surrounded by, because usually when I started in coffee and more generally in the hospitality business, I
Mhm.
was really drawn to wine. So I kind of surrounded myself with friends that are either way working in wine or sommeliers or selling wine or, vigneron, people making wine.
Mm.
So wine was and is still a very big part of my life. And
Mhm.
I do lots of tasting. Outside of coffee is what I do most probably, and climbing. That's like the three things
Mm.
I do. That's all I do. and yeah, so I started working in hospitality, handling, the wine. Used to work in this very high-end restaurants in Sydney, and I was taking care of the wines there, especially because I was French. I had a bit of knowledge of French wine. I wasn't a pro, still not probably about wine, but I knew a lot of things, so they kind of put me in place there. And then I shifted I think quite early on to coffee, especially in Australia, but we'll talk about that a bit later, I'm sure. But I'm still surrounded by wine all the time. Yeah, for sure.
So let's just going back a bit. So you're now in Bordeaux, and just for me to fill people in, like you help operate and I think probably play a significant role in the coffee production at L'Alchimiste, which
Mhm.
is the Alchemist in English,
Yeah.
which is this beautiful cafe. And I'm a coffee lover, like a lot of people out there. I think this is something today it's obviously such a dominant part of global culture. But I think there's a special subset of coffee lover who are also cafe lovers, who are also people who really are connected to cafes, and really are connected to the real deal. Not something that's kind of like an imitation of, and kind of passes by, but something that feels very genuine and very almost like a piece of architecture fits a landscape. A cafe that fits its cultural landscape, even the physical landscape. And that's what the L'Alchimiste really does. It's in this really crazy, wonderful little nook, this niche, in a back street of Bordeaux. And you sit there on these great tables that are sort of just perfectly proportioned for where you are and where you're sitting and the cobbles that you're sitting on. And the view is nothing. The view is kind of a shop across from you, but it works. It all makes sense. It feels all of a piece. It feels all of one design. And the coffee also is a big part of that, how it's presented, the kind of coffees you serve. And so the question that I have about all this, number one, I wanted to paint a picture for people who've never seen the place, but I also wanted to get a sense from you, how much is it designed like that? How much is it thought through in this intentional way? Or is it just a product of like trying to do better in each individual area?
Well, just to give a little background about that, because you loved it. Most of people love where we are, and that
Mm-hmm.
specific street, which is right in what we call the Golden Triangle, which is like the center of Bordeaux, where everyone wants to
Mm-hmm.
be, kind of. Um, it didn't used to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Bordeaux used to be kind of, especially like back like 10, 12 years ago, still, it
Yeah,
was gray and dirty and kind of sketchy and dangerous. And then
that's right.
an old mayor started to shift everything around, and started to be that city that we all know, that it's so good and so great to be living in. And that specific street where we are, Well, it was so bad when we first
Hmm.
came in. Arthur found the spot. He was like, "Yeah, I found this local there." I'm like, "Wow, you sure?" The building right across us was falling, so there was like this
Mm.
huge wooden stuff that were holding the building in place because it was actually falling down. And it was the smallest street where there was no street lights, and it was so sketchy. And now, looking back at it, it was the best decision we ever made. Now this is the street that everyone takes. This
Hmm.
everything is food shops and very great niche chocolate, very high end chocolate, coffee and wine and stuff like that. So that specific street is we're glad to be on it because we were probably the first, but now it became something great.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's exactly it. There's a
yeah,
flow. There's like a flow of energy through. There's
yeah.
like a little cultural river that flows there very naturally, and it all feels that way.
But to get back to your question about design and setup and ergonomics, I guess if I understood that right. I mean, I've been a barista for like more than 10 years now, so I've really knowledge now about how to set up stuff and ergonomics and my deep knowledge, especially this first cafe that we have because now we have another one, but especially this first one was how to set up the bar, how to design everything, what machines to get, how to serve stuff, what product to get, and everything around hospitality as well. So um, we have a strong kind of a art. So to put everything into perspective, there's three partners here at L'Alchimiste: the Arthur, me, and Virginie, which is she doesn't play a operational role really in L'Alchimiste, but she's an art dealer, so she's passionate about art and she
Mm.
knows a lot about art. So we have a strong bond with art at L'Alchimiste, especially. So she helped a lot. Definitely, you can tell with the shop and the materials that we chose and the paintings and everything that we have. Right now, we have this very cool ceramic show that's for sale. We have a lot of stuff going on, but so the three of us plus our architect company called Bureau Baroque, which is they're the one that has done they have done the new cafe as well. They're based in Bordeaux. They architects, but also the woodworkers. So they actually design and do the woodwork. They're
Wow,
the one that helped us,
very cool.
and it came out pretty great, especially for this small space. It's always
Mhm.
tough to design a small space that's lively and easy to work around in. So yeah, it came out great.
So there's a couple things I wanted to mention there. One is the story of black, sooty, dirty, disgusting Bordeaux. Like there's no story that you can tell about Bordeaux business, culture, lifestyle that doesn't include this background story, which is that Bordeaux is just covered the stone. Bordeaux is this building of light stone. I don't know exactly what stone it is, but it was covered in black soot, the entire city. And it did not look, as you might imagine, it didn't look great. And then the mayor, who was a top-ranking figure in the French government, I think
Yes, he was a
he was
minister as well.
he was a top prime minister, right? If I
Yeah, yeah,
recall.
yeah. Alain Juppé, yeah.
Right, Alain Juppé. So prime minister there being not the head of government, the head of government being the president, but
Mhm.
still being in a very important
Yeah,
role in the French government, and becomes a mayor of this relatively small city in the south, which is like a very unusual move to go from like top line national politics to go all to the other end of the spectrum. But he comes in, Juppé, and renovates the city,
yeah.
cleans it.
Wins
He
everything.
sees the jewel in the rough, and he really pulled it out and physically, literally cleaned the soot off the buildings. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that Bordeaux went through this just almost instantaneous, obviously it was not instantaneous, but it kind of just this flip from one thing, this dark thing, to this bright light thing that is now this
Mm.
kind of treasure. And you are part of that switch as well. And the question I have for you is, where in the timeline did that fit in relation to you transitioning from wine to coffee?
Um, I guess it all started maybe for Bordeaux. I mean, not for us, but maybe like about 10 years ago. In French, Bordeaux was called La Belle Endormie, which means how can I translate that? The pretty sleepy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know that
Sleeping
it
Beauty.
used to be an old pretty city, but now it's sleepy. There's no one going
Yeah.
there, and it's kind of dirty and sketchy and gray. So it kind of shifted everything around. Started by the docks. There were all these huge warehouse with nothing in it, just
Mm-hmm.
crackheads and prostitution back there, and it was kind of sketchy to hang out there. And now it's the Chartron neighborhood, which I'm lucky enough to be living in. I've been living there my whole life, and I've lived here. The flat that I'm in is in the Chartron, and I was here when it was sketchy, and I'm here now. It's super hypey and bobo, and everyone wants to be here, and the real estate is so pricey. But so it started here, and I think that kind of get people going on about what Bordeaux could be, and then I guess the whole city followed. And in line with us, I guess that started with that specific area where roastery is, which is called Darwin, like the Australian city. It's an old military complex, huge military complex that was renewed into about 100 different companies, but big organic cafe and restaurant and grocery store, and there's a huge skate park, and there's loads of associations, and there's a big beer brewery, and there's lots of things. And then we were one of the first ones to be in that area. It's across the river, so for people that never been to Bordeaux, the left bank is where everything's happening. That's the old city and the old buildings and everything, the city center. And across the river on the right bank, not much were happening. And so Darwin happened about 8 years ago, and we were lucky enough to be some of the first ones to be affiliated with Darwin, and we had a small place there, and we're still there now. We have this bigger cafe that's 300 square meters there. So we were lucky enough to have that spot there 8 years ago. And then, yes, almost 6 years ago, we started to look for shops, because we were on that right bank that we were selling to, on our website and to wholesale customers. But people, in the city, they didn't know us really. So we started to look for a shop, because Arthur didn't have any knowledge in hospitality, in service, and in the barista skills, basically. And I had that. So me moving into the company, said, well, we should open a shop so we can sell coffee there and make people taste them. So yeah, we found this spot, and then that was right when Bordeaux kind of clicked into place, and people realized that the city could be great. But I think it's been very hype for like 3 or 4 years now. It's been like that really cool city where all the Parisians want to come and move in, because the quality of life is so much better down here. It's human sized. It's like 30 minutes from the ocean. It's like 2 hours from Spain in the Pyrenees. It's everything's slower, and the quality of life is way better now. But I think people realized that maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Now that the city is like it's banging, everything's brand new. As you said, the dark walls. It's not like that anymore. It's all white and clear, and it's a good city now for sure.
It is, yeah. It's an amazing city. But I also feel like there is let's just say you and I have a good friend who's also a cafe lover, who introduced us, and whose name,
one of our biggest regulars, I guess, Jason, if you're talking about him.
Jason, we've unmasked him. He's definitely one of the most popular, most regulars of all the cafes in Bordeaux. But he kind of talks about you, and he's just a coffee guy in general, a cafe guy in general, but he talks about you sort of the coffee man of Bordeaux. That's like, not that you would ever say any of this about yourself, which you never said that, but from his point of view, the way you approach coffee, which is from a hospitality point of view, which is not to be, I have a contact, a friend, an associate here who's local to me, and he is really serious about his roasting. Like, he roasts all the coffee, brings beans. Like, if the beans are like a few hours too old, he'll just chuck them all, throw them. If you don't drink the coffee the right way, he'll tell you he is a coffee Nazi. Like, he thinks of himself as a coffee Nazi, but it doesn't sound like that's what's going on in your world, and yet you still produce something that is so seemed to be, at least from when I was there and drinking a lot of that coffee, consistently good. And not just the coffee itself, but also the experience, the way that you drink it, where and how and who's around you. So that the question I have there is like, how did you get something so hard, so right, and to do it consistently? And how did you connect with coffee specifically?
Well, hospitality is a big part of what we do, especially because when I came along, and that was where I learned, because I worked in those Michelin star restaurants and very high end, restaurants and cafes where hospitality was a big deal, and that always been a very important part of my life as a for work and for consumer. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, well, we'll talk about what we do specifically, but the four pillars of what we do at L'Alchimiste is definitely hospitality and service.
Mm-hmm.
Products, the quality of products and coffee that we buy, but again, we'll talk about that a bit later on for sure. Um, Sustainability, because we a big part of what we do is make sure that we impact as less as possible our planet for sure, because coffee comes from very far away and it's not the most sustainable harvest and crop that we can do, but we can implement stuff to make it better for sure. So all those other stuff that we do, we're trying to do as well as we can, while not uh, making sure that people don't really realize that it's there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yeah.
example, the quality of the product and the coffee that we serve, we're so nerdy. We have no point.
Mm-hmm.
We have no clue of how nerdy we get between our baristas and how big and deep we dig. But that's not what we want to show our customers. If you come in as a coffee nerd and you want to talk about what is coffee from, what's the processing, what's the fermentation length, what everything you want to know, we can talk about that for hours for sure. But if you come as a normal guest that wants to have a great coffee and a great experience, you'll have a great coffee that comes from that specific lot, from that specific farm that works dynamic farmings and stuff like that. But we don't want to showcase that in a way that people feel uncomfortable coming with us. And I know that some cafe that are so nerdy, and people are kind of like scared to go there because they feel like they don't belong at this nerdy place of coffee. And
That's great.
so great hospitality is a way to make people feel comfortable to get great coffee without feeling the whole geeky experience. That I always tell my team, I want to have like kind of a Michelin star restaurant service with, you know, loud pavement music in the background and tattooed people and people being smiley, and that's it. I want to be casual as hell, but as long as the service is perfect and on point. That's Service is by far the most important part of what we do, and it's also the most the what's the hardest to do for sure,
Mm.
the service, because quality and coffee and stuff like that, it's always trial and error, and then you learn from it. But service means humans, and humans is the hardest.
Right.
One customer will be different than the other, and then you might have not a great day and your staff not chew and this and that, you can be sick, and it's that's the toughest, but that's what we most proud of, and that's what we work on every day for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point of it, because as you said, like you can go in as much depth as you want with the coffee itself, and you can buy great beans, and you can do that at home probably just as effectively if you really want to put in the time. But that's not what it is really about. I think when people are coming to a place like yours, or a lot of the places that we've seen pop up in Bordeaux and around the world, they're coming to connect in a completely different way than they connect outside. Because when you're outside of that environment, you are your screen. You are all the media that's being streamed into your brain 24/7, just about your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, your all that shit. And you go to a place like L Alchimiste, sorry to mispronounce it, but
Yeah, it's all good.
I'm not going to attempt the French. But but when you come to a place like that, all that stuff feels irrelevant. It
Yeah.
feels like an intrusion. It feels like something you don't want there, like a freaking alligator just walked up. So you don't engage it. And instead you open your book, you open your notebook, you talk to the friend next to you, you talk to the stranger next to you, whatever you're doing. And I think that's kind of the amazing thing about it, because again, when you look at, let's say in New York City, where you have, great coffee, I'm sure as good as anywhere else. But you don't have that. You don't have that experience of being able to stop and to be where you are for an hour, for a full hour. You can be in that seat and you feel like it's the right place to be. And that's not something you find in many places in the world, never mind New York City. But even I would say, Israel, where I am, has a real coffee culture, of course, and people do like to sit, but it's not with that same level of calm, this kind of this designed experience. you know, this thing that's really been thought through from all elements. So that I think is why it's such a great place for me, in addition to the coffee. Um, but you know, I also really do want to think about like what is this wave that we're seeing around the world with regard to coffee. Like one day was just kind of something you ordered from McDonald's or whatever you could find, Starbucks if you were lucky, and then today it's gone through like not just one revolution, but it feels like two or three big revolutions where it is changing us, we're changing it. So just, you know, what are your thoughts about where coffee is today and what it means to this culture that we're in?
There's waves, as we talk about it in specialty coffee. Right now, we're in the third, what we call third wave. Some people talk about the fourth coming up. I don't know what's really all about specifically, but I would say that now people are willing and want to know what they drink and eat, you know, what it is, where it's coming from. We're moving past organic in a massive way, you know, like all the big corporations did your organic stuff, and it was the big thing that was happening 10 to 5 years ago, and now people really want to know where it's from, you know, what's the face behind it, how it grows, how much was he paid for it, and stuff like that. And it's the same for wine, it's the same for spirits, it's the same for food, it's the same for coffee. So I'd say specialty coffee as an industry. So to put everything in perspective, because not everyone knows what specialty coffee is, but it's a lot of things at once. But usually, specialty coffee is a coffee that is great tasting. Obviously, we have a scale of 100 as wine. Everything that's above 80, so all the best coffees in the world basically can pretend to be specialty coffee. And also, it's not only taste; it's also where it's from. So you have full transparency and traceability to the coffee that you buy, and you have almost none, or maybe one or two people in the middle of the chain between you, the drinker, the coffee buyer, and the producer. So that's why specialty coffee in general. So that means there's a big broad of stuff in specialty coffee, but it could be specialty coffee importers, green coffee buyers, roasteries, cafés, you know, wholesalers. There's going to be plenty of people in the middle in that chain, but it's growing in a massive way, in a big pace. It's exponential now, because 10 years ago it was only in those main big cities in the world that you could see that, you know, maybe, as you said, New York, maybe in the Bay Area, in London, especially in Australia, and Sydney, in Melbourne, where they all started, in Seattle, maybe, and stuff like that. But now it's every medium-sized city or maybe small-sized city of at least one specialty cafe. So it's something that's growing at a very big pace, and as much as you can see that huge companies are taking a huge interest in specialty coffee, because they see they're losing shares of that whole market, for sure. You know, some very cool especially Californian brands of specialty cafes and roasteries, they have been bought lately. You know, it was years back now, but I don't know if you heard, there was those three really big roasteries that were so cool, independent, in the Bay Area. Blue Bottle, you might have heard, or Stumptown or Intelligentsia. They all been bought to a point where, like, it doesn't even make sense. You know, I've met the owner of back then, the owner of Blue Bottle in the Bay Area, Mr. Freeman. What a very cool guy, by the way. And he started as, you know, a roasting shed in his backyard, roasting, you know, with the smallest hand roaster he had, and then building a roastery and a small cafe. And he opened like maybe 10 to 15 cafes in the area years later. And Nestle, there was like, they came along and they offered him, you know, 500 million for his company. So who says no to that, you know? So it's important that to realize and to see those big corporations moving ahead and buying those smaller roasteries and stuff like that, because you can tell there's a big, deeper trend going on, more than just this cool hip cafe with tattooed people that serve, you know, latte art and tulips on top of your cappuccino. It's definitely more than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's this weird tension we're seeing. I mean, you know, I write and talk and think about media a lot, and that's the trend that's been happening in media, which is that all these media organizations are owned by the same 4 or 5 massive companies. And then you have the emergence of independent media, you know, blogs and podcasts and independent companies. And it feels like the same tension. You have this tension between the independent spirit of what you're doing, which is the whole thing. Because just like in media, in hospitality as well, the moment profit becomes more important than anything else is the moment you lose the priority of the previous value, whether that value was truth in the case of media, or the experience of the guest in hospitality or in any other industry. It's the same thing. So this is like this core tension we're all facing, even beyond business, which is the individual versus the institution, the tribal and the authoritarian, and the individualistic, and people who are really more on the side of liberty and freedom of expression, freedom of action, freedom to be independent. So, that's it. I didn't know this was already becoming something that big businesses were starting to pick up on, and to maybe even, predate on. Like they're really just, they gobble it up when they see the opportunity, and it becomes a trend, because for them, the stakes are so low. If they eat up a company for 10, 20 million, $100 million, these are $100 billion companies, like Nestle. It's not a significant investment. It's just a great way to hedge their risk. And that's such a damaging thing.
And to kind of show that they're, in place and cool, and they look at like what's going on in the market, for sure. Us, even as a small company, we've been approached, and we're lucky and very happy to still be independent. And we really want to be as long as we can. And we're probably never going to be, selling shares to some other bigger companies that don't know what our core values are, so that's why we're growing at our own pace, and it's growing steadily but upwards every year. So we're very lucky to have that, and especially in France and in Bordeaux, where kind of everyone wants to be. So we're in the right place at the right time. We're kind of lucky for that. We're for sure still touching wood.
Yeah, but it also feels like, Bordeaux is kind of, you look at like New York City, which New York City never used to have like the big brand stores like Target and these big American chain stores. And you never used to find that really in New York City, and then you did. And then New York started just becoming all of that. Like there was nothing left except for that. All the little bookstores were gone, all the little clothing shops and whatever was replaced by these huge stores. And you look in London, and that's also happening on the high street as well, and maybe in Paris, I'm not as sure. But Bordeaux kind of was still able to protect its independence a bit, because it was late to the game, because it's not a global capital, and you still have that kind of little enclave there. But I imagine that you're going to have to be fighting for that more and more to keep it.
Yeah, I feel like you could be right in the middle of two seats in that regard, because those big cities, as you mentioned, London, Paris, New York, SF, or whatever, they all move towards those huge corporations and companies, because there was so many people living in those cities, and they kind of when a trend appeared, it started in these big cities, obviously. So as you said, we are late in that regard, but at the same time, as I see and hear people wanting more, as we said, better products, more traceability and stuff like that. So people now, I feel, the new trend is like people moving away from those big corporations. It's still not everything and not everyone, for sure. You can, but I feel like maybe we'll be lucky enough to not be too damaged by such trends, because since we're late, and the new trend is like people wanting more traceability and transparency and better products and locally grown stuff. But I mean, maybe we'll be lucky to kind of work our way through that in between the droplets.
Yeah, I hope so, because it's a very special place, Bordeaux. But let's, before we wind down, I want to just talk a little bit about coffee itself. So you were talking about the rating system that coffees 80 and up are specialty and considered of certain kind of quality. And also, like, guide us a little bit, because we've all heard about Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnays. We've heard about wine varietals, and we know that there are different producing regions in the world that are very good, France and California. But there is the same ability to differentiate among coffee sourcing and bean types, and so tell us what you like, and tell us what you gravitate towards, and give us just a little more of that taste.
Oh, that could be a very long subject. Well, basically in coffee, you have what we call commodity market and specialty market. Commodity is maybe like 98% of the market. That's what everything sold through stock. So everybody knows the two main species that are harvested in the world in regard of coffee, which is Robusta and Arabica. So Arabica is sold through the New York market actually every day, and London is for Robusta. So basically, you have those two species. Robusta is very low ground, very high yielding coffee that's kind of bitter, strong, and not that complex. It's very cheap, and there's loads of it's generally bigger harvest than Arabica. So usually Robusta is mostly for commodity coffee, and then you have Arabica, which is higher ground coffee that necessitate a specific climate, lower temperatures, less yield. So it's more complex, more acidic, less bitter, and also less yielding. So in specialty coffee, we gravitate toward Arabica coffee for sure. And Arabica doesn't mean that it's great. It means that it's probably better in a way that we like than Robusta. But it's not because you're buying Arabica that it's great. You can have terrible Arabica and excellent Arabicas.
Right.
And then when you talk about Arabicas, you have thousands of varietals and different variedad and cultivars and stuff like that, as I mentioned for wine, for cepage and stuff like that in wine. So that you have thousands of different ones. And then in regards of where we buy our coffee from, we mainly buy from Central America and East Africa, because for us it's where the best coffees are. And just a little background on Arabica coffee. Everything comes from Ethiopia. Without Ethiopia, there weren't any coffee in the world, any Arabica.
Right.
We all talk about those big producers, Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, but it all started in the western parts of Ethiopia. And without Ethiopia, there would not be any coffees in the world. So it's a plant that traveled a long way to be planted in different countries. So we definitely love Ethiopia. I've been there a couple of times myself. It's such a different country. It's especially for coffee, but humanly as well. It's just crazy down there. And so you have wild coffees that grows everywhere. That's a the wild plant there that grows just generally in the forest.
Wow.
So it's a special place for coffee. But then you have very good producing countries in East Africa, Kenya, Burundi, Tanzania, Yemen, even though the geopolitical situation now, even Ethiopia now is at war. So that's a very difficult part of the world. And then in Central America, you have very, very good producing countries like Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, Panama, of course, and very good coffees in Brazil too. So we buy mainly from those countries. And we travel to our region every year. We meet and know all the farmers that we buy from. You can buy two ways. You can buy, let's kind of get geeky and more specific, but you can buy spots. What we call spot. It means you go to a country or not even go there, and you taste a whole bunch of coffees and say, I want to buy that because it's the best. And then next year it's not there or it's not good, you don't buy it. So that's not how we really want to work. We trying to work year after year with the same farmers. So at Alchimiste, you won't have a very big broad of different coffees, and year after year, you won't have much of a change. But because we really want to work year after year with these farmers that we know and that we like, so we're dedicated to work with those farmers for the long term. So we know them. Either way, we buy straight from them and import ourselves for a smaller part of our coffees, or we work with a transport sourcing company called Belco here in Bordeaux, which are great. It's a family-owned business, and they know a lot about coffee. They have an office in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, and in Salvador, and now in Colombia. So they're on point on sourcing coffee. And then we get the coffee back to Bordeaux, we roast it, and then we heat away, sell it wholesale to any customers on small bags, or we just brew it in our bars with our baristas. We have 2 cafes, and so we have a knowledge of the whole chain, which is good because we know where the coffee's from. We've been there. We know how it's been produced and harvested, and then we know how it's been transported, and we roast it and we brew it. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and
like you
I
said,
mean, we
it's
can talk about that for like a whole week. I mean, it's such a deep subject, how we do stuff and how the coffee market works, for sure.
it is it's fascinating, and I actually not long ago read a book about how the coffee emerged as a commodity in the European exchanges in I think around the 17th century. Is a book of fiction by a guy named David Liss, who will be appearing on the podcast next week.
Okay.
So he'll be out soon. He wrote this really great thriller that's based around coffee. It's called The Coffee Trader, and
Nice.
it's about Western Europe being introduced for the first time to this bean, and nobody knows what it is, and they don't see the tidal wave, the economic tidal wave that's coming for the continent, except this one trader that the book is based around. So
Yeah.
it's a really fascinating history, and also it's a fascinating present day reality. It's something, when I came to Bordeaux, the reason I went there was to write a book, also a novel, and sort of inspired by events that happened to me. But a big part of that book is coffee. It's a fictional story about a guy who goes to Nicaragua and gets lost, as a good friend of mine had done. And when I was there, it's sort of like you see the magic of these coffee farms in the hills of Nicaragua, in the mountains, and it's so beautiful, it's so alluring, and coffee itself plays such an important role in those cultures that for me it became a part of this book that I was writing in Bordeaux. So the loop closes again.
Coffee plays a big role very often in most people's lives, for sure.
Yeah. So and that's the other part of this for me, which is something I was thinking of today, as I was like grinding beans to make my ninth coffee or something insane. I'm like asking everyone around me, anyone who comes into my zone, I'm like, do you want coffee? Do you want coffee? My wife walks into the room, I'm like, do you want coffee? And it's like, what is this thing? What is it about it that has got us so glued to it, that makes it the number one drink in the entire world after water? What is it about this thing? And that's the last question I want to put to you, and kind of explore this insanity we all have.
I don't know. I can't even answer that for myself. I don't know why I'm so addicted to it. I mean, I'm not that huge of a coffee drinker. I mean, I drink coffee for taste mostly. You know, my girlfriend, she can't wake up without making a V60 and drinking coffee, and she can't normally function without having caffeine in her body. But I'm not that type of guy, and I can be on traveling for 3 weeks and not having great coffee, and that's fine with me. If I'm not drinking coffee, I'd just rather drink good coffee. I don't want to be posh or whatever, but I just want to drink great tasting coffee. That's what I like. So that's what I'm drawn to. And as I started as a barista years and years ago, my whole goal was to be, you know, knowledgeable and geeky and about, you know, barista techniques and coffee and stuff like that. And I came a long way from that. So I'm still overly geeky about coffee and stuff like that, and all of our teams are because of that. But now it's more about the story behind it. What's the farmer doing? What is getting from it? What you know, agricultural practices this specific farmer has. And as I said earlier, the sustainability plays a big part of our company. And so, you know, that scoring system on 100, obviously the higher you go, the better the coffee, or the more complex. So there's lots of cafes and competitions and baristas and stuff like that are drawn to what we call the 90 plus coffees. Everything that's above 90, that are the super rare, very pricey, incredible tasting coffees.
Wow.
I was drawn to that. I'm still drawn to that, but now I'd rather drink. That's a super like especially geeky, nerdy things to say, but I'd rather drink a good 83 that I know that the specific farmer didn't use any specific insurance and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers, and it grows, and the farmer gets to sell it straight to the importer or to the roaster and makes an actual living, and his kids get to school, they have a proper home. And I'd rather drink an 83 like that than a 90 plus that where the farmers have been exploited and they barely cover the cost of production, you know? So complexity and taste has play less of a major role in how we buy and how we brew and what I like about coffee. So that's what I'm drawn to. I think coffee gets is exciting to people for various different reasons. People go in a cafe because they like their have a heart in their cappuccino. As I said, that's actually a big thing. When people they don't know much about coffee, they go to a great cafe, and they have latte art in their drinks. That's something that's very appealing. People take pictures and stuff like that. Or it will be the taste, will be the story, will be because of the caffeine. I don't know. There's all the stuff that altogether that makes coffee such a drink that nobody understands. I would say that me, the first one. We know coffee for centuries. It's, as you said, after water, that's what most people drink in the world, but also one of the crop that we know less about in the whole world. And people don't know much about coffee. People expect coffee to grow in bags in the shelves of a supermarket. They don't know where it's from. They don't know what it is. They don't even know it's a cherry that grows on a tree. So it's a big part also. What we do is training and making people understand what coffee really is. And I think that's very important. And we're still very early on into what we know about coffee and what the coffee is gonna get to be, I guess. Yeah, coffee is a great thing. It's gonna be less and less of it in a few years. We gotta watch out for all what comes ahead. Climate change, all that stuff. Everyone talks about it, but it's the same for coffee. More and more people want to great coffee, and less and less land is become habitable for coffee crops. So we're gonna see a big move up in terms of prices in coffee in the next few years for sure. And people have to understand why they have to pay more for the coffee. That's the main thing. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thinking about coffee as a story, like anything else, but a very unique story. And a romantic one. I think that's a big thing, that it engages our sense of romance. Even at 6 a.m. when we're trying to get out the house, it's this thing that I don't know, that somehow speaks to what we need, and delivers on it every day. And there's something about that reliability of having this button you can push in life, because you don't really have a lot of that in life. You really don't have that predictability.
It's
maybe
small
that's
bubble that you're gonna enjoy, even though it's not
exactly, and it's going to make whatever else you're doing a little bit either better or easier. So yeah, I think that's a great point to make.
Realize why people love so much work in cafes now. Kind of makes sense, no? Because people, really want to have just coffee when they go and work on the computers or read or whatever they have to do, or meetings. I have lots of people coming for meetings. There's like 6 people coming for like business meetings, drinking coffee. I guess that makes sense what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say last question, what are you reading? Or what do you recommend if there's a coffee related book? If you're reading something right now, it doesn't have to be coffee related. It can be just what you happen to be reading.
Well, I have a shelf, like all that is coffee. So we can talk about it for hours. There's plenty of one really great book that I love about coffee. It's easier. It's for everyone. It's James Hoffmann. World Class Coffee is an ex world best barista. He has a company, a roastery in London called Square Mile. Very knowledgeable guy, super nice dude, very approachable. And that's
could you open it up so I could see what it looks like inside? Oh wow!
Well, that's everything from barista techniques to farming to history, and it's very readable, easy to understand, and it's very technical at the same time. So if you had one book,
again, that's called Coffee by the World Atlas of Coffee by James Hoffmann. From beans to brewing, coffee explored, explained, and enjoyed. I'll have to look up James Hoffmann to find out who he is, because it seems like great.
He has a great YouTube channel that's very approachable. He talks about all things coffee. So that's for coffee. The main thing that I would say, well, there's dozens of books that we can talk about, but right now, what am I reading? I'm reading a Jack Kerouac book on the road.
Wow!
Adventure books,
Wow!
Yeah.
He was such a master in such
Oh,
a
yeah.
weird way, and his
Yeah.
books have this quality about them that you just can't replicate. You can't. There's just one of a kind.
Yeah. Well, inspired that's moving away from the topic here, but as I said, I'm doing a lot about rock climbing, and
Oh right.
um, the states away from the Alps here, the states, especially in Yosemite, played a big role in the rock climbing history, and they all were reading those travel and travel books like Jack Kerouac and stuff like
Right.
that. Um, so yeah, I've been started to read more and more of American adventure books lately. It's been great, loving it.
It's a great genre, and it's a really rich one. If you ever want to read a great adventure story, um, the first volume of the biography of Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore
Mhm.
Roosevelt, called Theodore Rex. No, sorry, it was not called that. That was the second one. There's the first one in that series, is just about this man who lived the most insane adventures. You just felt called to it over and over, raising buffalo in the West, and fighting a cougar with his bare hands, and just crazy stuff. But it's a great, especially climbing. There's something. I watched the Dawn Wall and the
Well,
documentary, and it's something about that,
yeah.
these guys, and
Yes, Tommy
what you
Pablo
guys do.
to me is such an inspiration.
A hero, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great movie.
in what we call it's a specific area of climbing called adventure climbing, because
Hmm.
you also have sport climbing and speed climbing and alpinism and stuff like that. But he's in adventure climbing. He's probably the master. He's the best. And he has such a good vision about it. So humble.
Hmm.
He just works and works and works on what he wants to do and the project that he has. It's great inspiration for coffee, for climbing, but for everything,
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
everything in life.
Yes.
He has a book
Yes.
called The Push that I really recommend
The
everyone to read.
Push.
The Push from Tommy Cabo.
Okay. Okay,
It's
I'm gonna buy that. He's an amazing individual with an incredible story, that when, especially watching that movie, and your mouth is already open, and then something else happens and it drops even lower. You're just like, excuse me.
crazy.
And the way he reacts to these things that happen to him in his life, these insane instances of adversity, is really something. And you think about yourself and you think, oh my god, if I even had a 100th of that, and then you start to think, well, how could I have 100th of it? I could surely have 100. Maybe I'm not going to achieve what he has in my version of it, but at least to get a fraction of it. And I think that is the question, and maybe it all begins with a cup of coffee. So
Yes.
uh, but thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for joining me
Thanks.
here. I'm going to come back and visit soon. I'm going to have a coffee. Maybe we'll
Well,
do
let me know
another
when you're around.
conversation. I definitely will.
Coffee
So,
and natural wine for sure.
so thank you, Johan. Tell anyone who wants to know, where do they find you? Where did they find the cafe online in reality?
So we're called L'Alchimiste Torréfacteur, which means L'Alchimiste roastery. We have one roastery and a cafe within the same space in Darwin, on the right bank.
Mm-hmm.
We have the smaller cafe that you visited on the left bank. So we have two spots. If you put L'Alchimiste coffee on the internet, you'll find us instantly. We have a website. We sell on our website worldwide. And then yeah. If anyone is keen to come and enjoy and maybe have a talk, you can ask for me or anyone on the team on our whatever Facebook, Instagram account, or on our website, on our email, whatever. But if anyone's around and in Bordeaux, we do lots of public cuppings and coffee tastings that are open and free for everyone. Yeah, that's us.
So I'll put a link in to the relevant places, but just so people know, let's say on Instagram, where do they find? How do you spell it? How do you spell it? The handle?
ALCHIS. No, what am I saying? How did you spell in English for me? Okay, it's ALCHIMISTE.
There we go.
And then Torréfacteur, TORREFACTEUR. which is the
Wow.
French word
Nicely
for
done.
roaster. But if you put L'Alchimiste, you'll find it. L'Alchimiste
Cool.
Bordeaux, whatever, you'll find us.
So yeah, so play around on Google. Those of you who didn't get it, it's really worth checking out. It's really worth seeing just the photos, and go to Bordeaux and go visit this incredible cafe and look up Yohan. Have an awesome conversation. So thank you, Yohan. We will be in touch. Maybe we'll do round 2 in person.
Cool. Looking forward to that.
Thank you so much.